What would you do if your HOA president kicked your front door open, like actually splintered it right while you were shaking hands with the state's top prosecutor? Mowing your lawn like clockwork. And then, getting treated like a criminal inside your own home. My name's Rex Holloway. After my divorce, I moved into my late grandfather's lakeside cabin in northern Michigan. The kind of place that smells like cedar and old stories. 2.3 acres of woods and water. A dock he built with his own hands after he came home from Korea. And a fireplace that still carries the scent of pipe tobacco if you get close. I thought I was coming home to quiet. Instead, I met Karen. Karen was, well, Karen. Late 50s. Sharp bob. Pastel sweaters starched like armor. And a clipboard welded to her palm. She ran the HOA like a little kingdom patrolling in a spotless SUV. Windows down so everyone could see her official magnet. Waving like a politician on election week. There's people who'd describe her as detail-oriented. I'd use a different phrase, petty tyrant with a tape measure. The first time she knocked, no. Pounded on my cabin door. She wasn't alone. She brought a grin. A courtesy notice. And a dozen ways to ruin my afternoon. According to her, my dock was 3 feet too long. My fire ring was an unpermitted combustion structure. And my porch light was, and I quote, aggressively lumined. She rattled off 47 violations, like she was auctioning off my sanity. $500 in fines up front. $75 a day until full compliance. She smiled a tight little smile when I told her the cabin was older than the HOA. Previous ownership is irrelevant. Mr. Holloway. 30 days or we file a lien. She said lean like she was savoring saltwater taffy. I didn't yell. I didn't slam anything. I just waited until night and drove to the county courthouse with a thermos of truck stop coffee and the stubbornness my granddad left me. Paperwork doesn't lie if you know how to read its silences. It took me hours. And my eyes went blurry more than once. But there it was. The HOA's formation documents were filed months after Grandpa passed. With a signature that sure didn't match his. Wouldn't have matched even on his shakier days. The developer's son, now a board member, looked awfully comfy on the filings. 2. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe it wasn't. My gut said it wasn't. The next dawn, Karen came back with a surveyor and a neighbor I half knew from the tire shop. A man whose shoulders lived up around his ears, like they were hiding from the weather. They tromped the property line, while Karen barked measurements and took photos through my windows. Through my windows. Thankfully, I had installed cameras the night before, nothing fancy. But decent enough to catch the tone of a person's voice when they think the law doesn't apply to them. There's the violation, she said, pointing at my fire ring like it had personally insulted her. The surveyor avoided my eyes. Later, he muttered to me in the driveway that Karen had hired him cheap. Then pushed him to be creative. He looked like a man being squeezed, and not just by debt. By the end of that week, I'd collected a mountainous pile of paper and a marching line of headaches. The violations multiplied like rabbits. Daily notes. Nighttime drive-bys. Anonymous environmental complaints about fishy smells near my septic field. Funny. That because the only thing that stank around here was the pink gardening gloves I'd seen on Karen when she discovered the smell. You know that feeling, when something clicks and everything around it gets loud. Yeah. That. And then, there was the diner. Murphy's. Out on the state road. The kind of place where coffee comes with a side of town gossip. Karen was there on a Thursday, telling anyone who'd listen that I was unstable, dangerous, with military training. Never mind, I never served. It was my grandfather who did. I kept my mouth shut, paid my check, and walked out. Defamation tastes like burned toast, and it leaves a long aftertaste. But I was building something now, a record. Every word, every visit, every fake complaint. I cataloged it all, like I was sorting hardware in baby food jars on a basement shelf. I didn't want a war, but the war wanted me. So I hired a lawyer. Her name was Stella Crawford. From Grand Rapids. Steel eyes. Steady hands. A way of listening that made you think twice before you tried to bluff. We met over strong coffee at a table that wobbled. Michigan has private attorney general statutes, she said. Then paused while the waitress wedged a sugar packet under the leg. If there's a pattern of fraud and abuse, we can sue on behalf of everyone harmed, not just you. Also, since your cabin predates the HOA by decades, you may not be subject to their rules at all. She didn't promise anything. Good lawyers don't. But her face did a thing when I showed her the mismatched signature and the fish dumping videos. A little tightening. Purpose, finding its code. At the next HOA meeting, paper plates. Lukewarm coffee. A folding table at the community center. Neighbors showed up like they always did. Shoulders hunched. Eyes down. Karen sat at the front with her board. All of them wearing the kind of smiles that show too many teeth. When I stood and calmly read through my list of documented mistakes, there was a hush. Not dramatic. Movie hush. Just that small room air change when people remember what fairness should feel like. And then Dale, the tire guy, whose face always seemed to be apologizing, cleared his throat and said the formation paperwork looked sketchy from the beginning. The room went still. Karen's pen froze above her minutes. That night, 3 neighbors found me in the parking lot. Martha, who'd been ordered to tear out her late husband's memorial garden for non-conforming flora. Tom, an Afghanistan vet, who'd been told his flagpole was aggressively vertical. A young couple with twins fined for chalk drawings on their own driveway. One by one, the pattern stopped being mine alone. Karen didn't back off. Petty tyrants rarely do. She escalated. She started showing up after dark, crouching near my bushes to catch me violating porch light rules. She called my mortgage company a brother-in-law in banking, of course hinting I was unstable. She made herself very busy. And every single time, my cameras saw more than she meant for them to. It wasn't long before the money trail began to stink. The HOA reserve account didn't match the budget and hadn't for years. Dozens of invoices routed through a property services firm owned by, what do you know, Karen? Payments for work that never happened. Missing funds tallied not in pennies, but in tens of thousands. I'm not a forensic accountant, but I can read subtraction. We turned the numbers over to Stella, and Stella's eyebrows did that little lift again. What broke it open wasn't a spreadsheet. It was people. The surveyor, nervous Jimmy, came back to my porch with his brother, a private investigator Karen had hired to dig up dirt on me. They were tired. They were done. She told me find something or make it up. The PI said, his voice barely above a whisper. I recorded it. I kept everything. He slid a flash drive across my table like it was heavy. We listened together. Karen's voice sounded smaller without her clipboard. I didn't sleep good after that. Sorry, didn't sleep well. Not because I was scared. Because I was angry in that cold, quiet way that settles under your ribs. But anger is no plan. Stella had a plan. We filed a counterclaim fraudulent formation, harassment, elder abuse by way of fabricated fines against widows and retirees, misuse of funds, intentional infliction of emotional distress. Big words. Yeah. But under them were simple things, lies, bullying, and money that went missing into the pockets of people who thought no one would look. The local news came because bullies love a microphone, and Karen had one. She fed Channel 7. I mean the local station, a story about a dangerous neighbor terrorizing a peaceful community. They rolled up my drive with cameras, and I invited them in. I brewed coffee. I stacked documents. I handed over audio, video, and the names of neighbors who wanted to talk. The segment that aired wasn't the monster story Karen pitched. It was the opposite HOA horror, when rules go rogue. Folks started reaching out from across the county and then across the state, telling tales that rhymed a little too neatly with ours. That's how I ended up shaking hands with Michigan's Attorney General in my kitchen on a sky blue morning. We weren't buds. We weren't making deals. We were simply organizing facts. The AG had a team. Stella and I had boxes. Martha had cookies she pretended were just extras from church. In my living room, quiet as snow, we laid out charts and timelines and receipts that smelled like printer ink and victory. Then the door exploded. Karen stormed in like she was serving a warrant signed by the Almighty. Clipboard locked in a death grip. Tape measure swinging. Immediate compliance. She barked. Before her eyes adjusted to the room. The badges. The faces that didn't belong to her. The silence that wasn't fear this time. The Attorney General didn't stand. Didn't shout. She just set down her pen and said, very calm, "Ma'am, you have just committed multiple crimes in front of Michigan's chief law enforcement officer. Please step outside while we discuss your charges." Karen's mouth opened and shut like a porch light moth. For once, there was nothing on her clipboard that could save her. You'd think that'd be the end. It wasn't. It was the pivot. After Karen stumbled out, escorted gently but firmly by a couple of big-shouldered investigators, the AG turned to me and asked for the deed box I'd mentioned. "It's in the loft," I said, "just above the bookshelf." The box was army green, dented at the corners, and smelled faintly of oil and cedar. Inside were my grandfather's medals, a stack of letters folded down to perfect squares, and a crackling, onion skin deed from 1960 that settled one more argument. My property line ran 40 feet wider than the county map, right under Karen's rose garden and gazebo. She'd been sipping iced tea from furniture planted on my earth. Boundaries, Stella murmured, are more than lines. They're history. She wasn't being poetic. She was marking an exhibit. We took statements. We made copies. The AG's people left with boxes and a promise to be in touch soon. Karen waited outside near her SUV, stiff as a lamppost, watching as my neighbors waved from my driveway. She'd ruled with fear for so long that she'd forgotten what community looks like. It doesn't look like unanimity. It looks like people bringing casseroles and truth at the same time. The week that followed was a blur of depositions, notaries, and nervous laughter. You know how people crack jokes when they're scared? There was a lot of that. Tom told me his wife made him promise not to start an argument at the next board meeting. Martha kept baking. The twins' parents brought chalk drawings of my cabin. I tacked them to the fridge like armor. I was tired, like soul tired, but I'd stopped waking up angry. I woke up determined. Karen tried one last flurry. Anonymous letters. Calls to the county. A police report claiming I'd threatened her with specialized training. The officer who came out had already watched hours of my footage and read my logs. He shook his head, took notes, and told me to keep doing what I was doing. Document. Don't retaliate. Let the process work. Bullies, he said. Burn themselves if you don't hand them matches. He wasn't wrong. The property services invoices from Karen's shell company started unraveling fast. Her son's failed restaurant had been patched with HOA funds, casino markers, cash withdrawals that didn't match any vendor names. We didn't need to guess anymore. We didn't need adjectives. We had bank statements. The board. They cracked like old paint in August. Some tried to act shocked. Some looked relieved, like they'd been waiting for someone to name the thing they'd been smelling. One man resigned mid-meeting. He set his key fob down like it weighed as much as a brick. Then came the morning sunlight and blue jackets. Federal agents top-nom. Polite. Terrifying by the simple weight of their arrival, pulled into Karen's drive at dawn. Neighbors watched from behind curtains and half-closed doors. The clipboard fell on the driveway like a crown that never fit. They treated her with respect. Because that's what law does. It maintains dignity, even when dignity wasn't offered to others. But they did take her away. And they took the treasurer, too. And the developer's son, who'd been very generous with a dead man's pen. When the charges were read in court: fraud, embezzlement, falsification of records, harassment. Karen looked small. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered Martha's garden, Tom's flag, the twins' chalk, and the nights I caught Karen crouched behind my bushes like she was hunting something that belonged to her. The feeling passed. The judge, a woman with the kind of patience you can't fake, didn't roar. She simply asked for the facts to be read once more, and then looked at the numbers. She froze the accounts. She installed a receiver, and she said something I won't forget. Neighborhoods are not fiefdoms. Associations exist to serve, not to rule. It landed like a stone in a still lake. And the ripples went a long way. Now, here's the part most people don't see when the news cameras pack up the slow work. The meetings that aren't dramatic, where you decide whether a broken fence gets fixed by volunteers or a hired crew. The spreadsheets that finally line up. The apologies that arrive as casseroles and folded notes on your porch. The way a place relearns itself. We held a vote, an honest vote, with notices mailed, ballots counted in the open, and volunteers checking each other's math, and we dissolved the HOA. Not forever. Not out of spite. But because it had been built on rot and fear. We'd rather plant fresh than pour nutrient into poisoned soil. The court approved the dissolution, ordered restitution, and named a temporary committee to wind things down in daylight. Not in whispers. My daughter came home from college that weekend. She stood on the dock with me, wind pushing her hair into her mouth, laughing as she blew it away. "Dad," she said, "I'm proud of you. I didn't know what to do with that. So I handed her a mug and said the sky looked like weather." You can be brave in court and still get tongue-tied when your kid says something that kind. Martha replanted her memorial garden. She put in a little wooden bench with her husband's initials carved on the underside where only she could feel them. Tom organized fishing mornings for veterans who needed quiet more than conversation. The twins drew a whole city on their driveway, a cathedral of chalk, and no one said a word except nice colors. We took Karen's old rose garden on my land, by the way, and turned it into a community compost bin. It stank for a while. Then it didn't. Then it fed flowers. I started a small retreat for veterans in Grandpa's name. Not a business. Just a few weekends a year where cabins are opened. Boats are gassed. And folks who carry too much get to set it down for a couple days. Martha runs the booking notebook because she doesn't trust computers any farther than she can throw them. And honestly, she's probably right. Tom fixes the motors that never want to start on the first pull. The twins' parents handle food like champs. And I make coffee and try not to burn the pancakes. Sometimes, in the quiet afternoons, I pull out Grandpa's letters. He writes about mud and boredom, fear, and the taste of oranges when you haven't had sugar in months. He writes about coming home, building a dock, and making a place where his family could breathe. He doesn't write about homeowners associations, because those weren't his monsters. But he writes about bullies. They look big up close. He says in one letter, but they shrink when the lights come on. People ask me, why didn't you move easy? It wasn't about square footage and property values. It was about a promise. This cabin wasn't just boards and nails. It was a name carved in a beam. Memories stacked like firewood. And, let's be real. Running only teaches bullies they're fast. Also, I had neighbors worth staying for. When I started all this, folks avoided eye contact at the mailbox. Now, we swap tools without a ledger. We've got a little group Martha calls it the coffee club that meets on my porch once a week. No minutes. No motions. Just coffee hot enough to scald, and stories that remind you why neighbor is one of the best words in the language. Once, a new couple moved in up the road. The husband kept glancing at our compost bin like it was a trap. I waved him over, handed him a sack of potato peels, and said, "Throw 'em in." He asked, carefully, "Is there a rule?" I told him the only rule was no meat. Martha added, "And no cruelty." He laughed. But later he told me his last neighborhood didn't laugh much. He said the rules wasn't clear. I didn't correct him. Sometimes grammar's less important than relief. We still get letters now and then from folks in other neighborhoods, in other states, asking how to fight back without burning everything down. I'm not a lawyer, and this ain't legal advice. But here's what I say. Document everything. Don't escalate. Find a good attorney who knows your state's consumer protection laws. Band together, shine light. Bullies, like shadows, don't supply them. And for the love of all that's holy, stop letting the loudest person run the room. I won't pretend Karen disappeared from my head after the handcuffs. Sometimes I catch myself listening for her SUV at night. That slow roll past my mailbox. Sometimes I dream about the sound of my door slamming open. Trauma's funny that way. It likes to visit even after it's been evicted. But the visits are shorter now. And when they end, they leave behind something steadier than fear. Gratitude. Maybe. Or grit. One afternoon in late summer, I heard footsteps on the dock and looked up to see Dale the tire guy standing there with a tackle box and a shy smile. We fished in easy silence for a long while. Finally, he said, "I should have spoken sooner." I told him truth shows up when it's ready. We both watched a heron lift off the reeds like it had studied the concept of grace longer than we'd been alive. "You think she'll come back?" he asked. Karen first shook my head. "To this place, no. To someone else's, maybe." We both knew the answer. Bullies move like storms. If the air's right, they gather. That's why you teach people to read the sky. The Attorney General's office wrapped up the last threads that fall. Restitution checks went out. A few folks cried in the post office parking lot. The developer's son pled out, then moved to a different county, where his last name didn't ring like a bell. Karen's sentence wasn't long by movie standards, but it was long enough to make a point. She'd have time to think. So would everyone who cheered while she measured our fences. On the first snow, I swept the porch with Grandpa's old broom. The handles smooth where his hands wore it down. I leaned it against the wall and stood still for maybe a full minute. Listening to the silent snow gives a place. It felt like forgiveness. Not for Karen, she can find her own, but for this ground, and for me. For the months I almost gave up. So, yeah. That's how an HOA fight turned into a neighborhood's second chance. It started with fines written in a tight hand, and a tape measure flashed like a badge. It ended with neighbors learning how to be neighbors again. With compost and coffee, and a bench where a widow can run her hand across initials carved on the underside, and remember the laugh that put them there. When I sit on the dock now, coffee in hand, sun shouldering up over the pines, I swear I can still smell Grandpa's old spice and sawdust. Maybe it's just the cedar. Maybe it's memory doing its soft work. Either way, the boards hold. The water answers wind with little shivers. A loon calls. I breathe. If you're listening to this, and your stomach tightened because your own HOA has a Karen with a clipboard, hear me. You're not alone. Start small. Write things down. Find one neighbor. Then 2. Then 10. Bring cookies. Bring courage. Don't hand the bully your matches. Let the light do what it does. What would you do if your HOA nightmare knocked like that at your door? Anyone else had a board turn into a little kingdom on your street? Drop your story in the comments. You never know who needs the nudge. Who might be sitting at a kitchen table right now with a stack of letters and a knot in their chest, waiting to hear that someone like them won.